A black woman steps onto a construction site, ready to lead. But when a worker dismisses her authority, thinking she doesn't belong, little does he know, she's the owner of the company. What happens next will change everything. Can she prove herself, or will prejudice win the day? The sun beat down fiercely on the construction site, where workers moved about with purposeful energy, their tools clinking against metal and stone as the sound of machinery hummed in the background. The air was thick with the scent of fresh cement and the dust of hard labor, and amidst this bustle, Jasmine stood poised, a calm presence in an otherwise chaotic scene. Her hands, though delicate, held a tablet with the plans for the new building that was taking shape, her expression unreadable as she studied the layout. Jasmine wasn't just another businesswoman. She was the owner of the construction company overseeing this project. A woman of color in an industry that was often dominated by men, she had worked tirelessly to get to where she was. Her reputation was built on merit, knowledge, and a relentless drive to break down the barriers that so often kept people like her from succeeding. She adjusted the brim of her cap, her cool demeanor a stark contrast to the heat of the day. As she looked over the plans, she could hear the workers around her discussing the logistics of the project. Tom, one of the workers, was speaking loudly, giving instructions with an air of authority that seemed to disregard anyone who didn't meet his idea of professionalism. Jasmine stepped closer, her voice steady but firm. "Tom, I need the steel reinforcements checked before the foundation pour. Make sure the measurements are accurate and everything is aligned properly." Tom, a burly construction worker in his late 30s, looked at her, his brow furrowing. He didn't recognize her immediately, and his expression soured. He had been on job sites for years, and in his mind women, especially women of color, didn't belong in positions of authority here. He had worked under managers, not bosses. The mere fact that she was asking him, a seasoned worker, to adjust his work felt like an affront. Tom scoffed, chuckling to himself as he leaned on his shovel. "You're going to have to ask someone else, sweetheart. This is construction, not your office." His tone was dismissive, dismissing her without a second thought, his eyes never leaving the task he'd been focused on. Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. She held her ground, her posture straight and unyielding, while her mind worked rapidly, calculating the best way to respond. She'd encountered this kind of prejudice before, men who assumed that because she was a woman or because of her skin color, she wasn't capable of doing her job. It wasn't the first time she'd been overlooked, but she would ensure it would be the last time this man would assume she didn't belong in the space she built. "I'm not asking," she replied, her voice calm yet unwavering. "I'm telling you. The measurements are off. Check the rebar specs again." Tom paused, taken aback by the firmness of her tone. For a moment he stared at her, then scoffed again, shaking his head as if he hadn't heard her right. "Sure thing, lady. Let me know when you've got a real contractor to handle this," he muttered, turning away from her and resuming his work. Jasmine stood still for a moment, the dust swirling in the air around her. The frustration boiled within her, but her exterior remained calm. She had learned long ago that no matter how they tried to undermine her, she would never back down. In the silence of the construction site, her thoughts raced, but her face remained impassive. She knew this situation wasn't just about construction, this was about respect. She had built her company from the ground up, not with a sense of entitlement, but with the understanding that respect was earned through hard work, dedication, and integrity. It wasn't just her knowledge of blueprints that made her qualified for this job. It was her experience, her ability to lead, and the way she had handled hundreds of projects just like this one. Still, there was a sinking feeling in her stomach, knowing how often men like Tom dismissed her contributions, how often her skills were overlooked simply because of her gender and the color of her skin. But Jasmine wasn't one to let herself be defined by others' narrow-mindedness. She was here for a reason, and no one, least of all this worker, was going to undermine her. As she turned to walk away, a sudden urge to prove herself flared up. She would handle this with grace, but she wouldn't let this pass. Not this time. Not when it was so clear that Tom's assumptions were so deeply rooted in prejudice. The afternoon sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the construction site. The workers, now moving slower as the day wore on, continued their tasks with tired but diligent motions. Jasmine moved along the edge of the site, her steps purposeful, as she passed by Tom again, who was now overseeing the placement of some heavy equipment. She didn't want to make a scene. She never did. But after her earlier encounter with Tom, she realized that something needed to change. The prejudice wasn't going to disappear on its own, and she wasn't going to sit back and let him continue with his assumptions. Jasmine approached Tom again, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, cutting through the sounds of the construction chaos. This time, he didn't seem to notice her right away. He was busy shouting orders to a few of the other workers, his voice rising over the hum of the machines. When he finally noticed her standing next to him, his face tightened and his body language stiffened. He must have thought she was coming to challenge him again, but instead of backing off, Jasmine squared her shoulders and made her way directly to him. "Tom," she said, her voice clear and controlled, "I need you to get the rebar checked right now. The measurements are wrong, and if they aren't corrected, it could delay the project." This time, Tom didn't even look at her with the same dismissive look he had before. Instead, he gave her a slow, mocking smile, as if humor was the only response he had to her request. "Didn't we already go over this?" he said, raising an eyebrow, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I told you before, this is construction. You probably don't understand the details of what's going on here. Maybe you should leave the heavy lifting to the guys who actually know how this works." Jasmine's patience, while tested, held firm. But inside, a quiet anger began to rise. She had heard these comments before, whether in boardrooms or job sites, men who thought they could define her capabilities based on the surface. What they didn't realize was how much she had built, how much she had sacrificed to get here. Her response was not to raise her voice, but to lower it, adding a deliberate weight to every word. "Tom, I'm not here to discuss your assumptions. I'm here because you have an important job to do and I need you to do it. That means verifying the measurements now. No excuses." Tom opened his mouth to argue, but then he stopped, noticing the way Jasmine stood, her stance strong, her eyes unwavering. She wasn't backing down. For a brief moment their eyes locked. Tom could see something in her gaze, a quiet authority he had ignored earlier, now commanding his full attention. But instead of backing off, he huffed in annoyance, muttering under his breath. "Fine, fine. I'll check it again, just to make you happy," he said sarcastically. Jasmine didn't flinch at his tone, knowing that, regardless of his attitude, she was the one in control of the situation. She watched as he turned away and began to walk toward the steel beams, his attitude still resistant, but this time with a reluctant acknowledgement that he had to do what she said. As he disappeared into the chaos of the site, Jasmine stood silently, the weight of the exchange settling over her. Her thoughts were clear. This wasn't just about getting the job done. It was about asserting herself in a world where people like Tom didn't see her as an equal. It was about showing him and everyone else around her that respect wasn't a privilege to be granted to a select few. It was a right. The workers, still busy with their tasks, had stopped for a moment, overhearing the interaction between Jasmine and Tom. The whispers that followed were subtle but unmistakable. They weren't just gossip. They were the murmurs of people witnessing a shift. A shift in how Jasmine was going to be treated from now on, how she was going to demand to be treated. But Jasmine didn't care about the whispers. She had done what she needed to do. Tom may not have understood it yet, but she wasn't about to let his ignorance dictate how the rest of the day would go. She turned away, focused back on the task at hand. The rebar would be checked, The measurements would be corrected, and this construction project would move forward, as it always did, thanks to her leadership. And as for Tom, he would learn sooner or later. As the day wore on, the tension on the construction site simmered just below the surface, like a kettle on the verge of boiling over. Jasmine continued her rounds, checking the work being done, ensuring that everything was aligned with the blueprints. The men on the site, however, seemed to be moving with a quiet resistance, their glances more pointed, their murmurs louder. Tom had returned to the steel rebar, but his movements were slower than usual. He was still upset about Jasmine's insistence that he recheck the measurements. He grumbled under his breath, working with a deliberative slowness, as if trying to prove to himself that he was still in control. Jasmine caught sight of him again as she passed by, the faintest flicker of irritation crossing her face. She had expected some resistance, but the subtle undermining was getting under her skin. Tom was making this personal. She needed to act before this situation escalated into something more damaging. She walked up to the group of workers near the rebar, her eyes scanning the area. Tom was hunched over, writing something on a clipboard, clearly not paying attention to her. The other workers who had been watching the exchange from the sidelines were murmuring amongst themselves, their glances flicking toward Jasmine, then away, not wanting to get involved in the confrontation. Jasmine took a deep breath, her mind racing. She was about to confront Tom again, but this time it wouldn't just be about the project. It was going to be about him, about showing him that he couldn't just dismiss her because she was a woman or because of the color of her skin. This was about respect, and she wasn't backing down. She approached him again, her presence almost silent as she stood behind him. Her voice was measured when she spoke. "Tom, how are the measurements looking? Did you recheck the specs?" Tom didn't look up from his clipboard, avoiding her gaze. "I'll get to it when I'm done with this," he muttered. His tone was still curt, dismissive, but this time Jasmine wasn't going to let him brush her off. She stood there, waiting for him to acknowledge her. Minutes passed, and the air between them thickened, heavy with unspoken tension. Jasmine knew she was at a crossroads. If she didn't act now, she risked losing the respect of the workers around her, not to mention allowing Tom's behavior to escalate further. Finally, Tom glanced up, his eyes narrowing as he saw her standing there, not backing down. "What now?" he asked, his voice thick with frustration. Jasmine didn't flinch. She stepped forward, meeting his gaze with quiet confidence. "Now, you're going to listen to me, Tom," she said firmly. "I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to make sure that this project is done right, and that means making sure the specifications are followed. So, if there's a problem with the measurements, we fix it. Together." The words landed with force, her calm tone now holding a sharp edge. Tom looked at her for a moment, his jaw tight. For a second, he seemed to consider arguing again, but something in her unwavering gaze made him hesitate. He stood up, finally acknowledging her with a hard look. "Fine, I'll check it again," he grumbled, though it was clear he was less than pleased. His reluctance was palpable, but for the first time that day, he wasn't dismissing her outright. Jasmine nodded. "Good. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again," she said, her voice still calm, but carrying the weight of authority. She could see the resistance in Tom's eyes, the stubbornness that wanted to refuse her, but Jasmine knew that she had to maintain control, not only for the sake of the project, but for her own dignity. As Tom walked away to double-check the rebar, Jasmine stood there for a moment longer, taking in the silence that had fallen over the workers. The tension was still thick, but it had shifted. They were no longer just watching her. They were watching him. They were waiting to see how he would respond, how he would react to the authority she had just asserted. Jasmine didn't need their approval. She didn't need them to cheer her on. But in that moment, she knew that her leadership was on display for all of them to see, and that, above all, was what mattered. As Tom continued with the task, Jasmine turned her attention to the next part of the project, her mind focused and sharp. She didn't let the tension derail her. She knew how to handle men like Tom. It was just a matter of time before he realized he was wrong. But until then, she had work to do. And no matter how much he resisted, no matter how much he tried to undermine her, Jasmine wasn't going anywhere. She would lead this project, and she would make sure that everyone knew exactly who was in charge. The sound of hammering and the buzz of power tools filled the air as the construction site continued its daily rhythm. Jasmine, despite the growing tension, moved through the site with focused determination. She made sure every worker was in position, ensuring that the project was running on schedule. But the weight of the lingering hostility from Tom was undeniable. Even though he had reluctantly agreed to double-check the measurements, there was an air of stubbornness that still clung to him. His behavior hadn't changed. He was still treating Jasmine as though she didn't belong in his world, and the other workers were watching it unfold with subtle curiosity. As Jasmine passed the area where Tom was working, she noticed that he was talking with another worker, Jim, who looked somewhat uncomfortable. Tom's voice was loud enough for her to hear, and as she approached, she caught a snippet of the conversation. "Yeah, I don't know what's going on with her. She thinks she can just come in here and start giving orders, like she owns the place. Can you believe that?" Tom's voice was laced with derision. Jasmine felt the sting of his words, but she didn't stop walking. She could hear Jim's muffled response, but it didn't matter. She knew exactly what this was. Another attempt to undermine her authority, another attempt to belittle her. Tom wasn't just defying her orders. He was actively trying to create doubt among the other workers about her competence. Jasmine took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was the reality she lived in. She had dealt with these subtle attempts at undermining her before, but there was something about today, about Tom's open dismissal, that pushed her to the edge. She decided it was time to stop letting his behavior slide. She would confront him once more, but this time it would be different. This time there would be no room for denial. She wasn't just going to correct his work, she was going to make sure he understood exactly who he was dealing with. Her steps quickened as she made her way toward Tom, whose back was turned as he spoke to Jim. She was almost upon him before he noticed her presence. When he did, he straightened up, his face morphing into that familiar smirk that made her blood boil. Jasmine didn't give him the chance to speak first. She cut through his smugness with a calm but firm voice. "Tom," she said, her tone controlled, but with a hardness that was impossible to ignore. "You and I need to have a conversation now." Tom hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly. He glanced at Jim, who shifted uncomfortably and then took a step back, sensing that this was a moment he didn't want to get involved in. "About what?" Tom asked, his voice challenging, though the cocky edge seemed a bit softer than before. Jasmine didn't waste any time. "About respect," she said, her words steady and clear. "I'm here to do a job just like you. But you keep treating me like I don't belong here, like I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't tolerate that from anyone, and I'm not going to start with you." For a moment, Tom was silent. His defiant posture softened just a fraction, but he quickly recovered, the arrogance creeping back into his voice. "You think I'm disrespecting you? You've got to be kidding me. I'm just doing my job, and maybe if you knew how construction worked, you wouldn't be so upset." Jasmine's patience was wearing thin, but she maintained her composure. She had to stay calm. This was the moment where everything could shift. "This isn't about construction," she said slowly, making sure her words carried weight. "This is about you assuming that just because I'm a woman, and because of the color of my skin, I can't do this job. But you're wrong, Tom, and it's time you realize that." His face hardened, his jaw clenched, as he fought the urge to dismiss her once again. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, clearly uncomfortable. "I've been doing this for years. I don't need a lecture from you." Jasmine stood tall, her eyes never leaving his. She wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. You might be used to running things your way, Tom, but I'm the one calling the shots here. I built this company. I made it possible for you to be here today, working on this project, and if you can't respect me, then you need to leave. The words hit him harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time, Tom could see the full scope of the situation. Jasmine wasn't just another worker. She wasn't someone he could dismiss or belittle. She was the owner. And he had been treating her as if she were nothing more than an outsider. His hands tightened around the clipboard in his hand, and his posture slumped. The arrogance was gone now, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Jasmine stood her ground, her heart racing slightly, but her mind was steady. She didn't want this confrontation, but she had known it was coming. She had known that there would always be people like Tom, people who saw her as less than, no matter how much she achieved. But she would always stand tall, and she would never let anyone, especially someone like him, make her feel small. Finally, Tom looked down, a flicker of shame crossing his features. The smirk was gone, replaced with an awkward, reluctant admission of his mistake. "All right, I'll get the measurements checked again," he muttered, his voice quieter than before. But Jasmine knew this was more than just a compliance with her request. For the first time, Tom had acknowledged that he had made a grave mistake. Jasmine didn't waste time with further words. She turned on her heel, walking away with a sense of finality. The confrontation was over, and while it hadn't been easy, Jasmine had made her point. She had demanded the respect she deserved, and Tom had no choice but to grant it. As she walked back into the heart of the construction site, the workers began to resume their tasks. Jasmine knew they had all witnessed what had just transpired, and while some would continue to doubt her, others would recognize the quiet power she wielded. The fight for respect was far from over, but Jasmine was ready for whatever came next. The next few hours on the construction site passed in a blur of activity, but for Jasmine, the air felt different. The tension from earlier had yet to dissipate, but there was a subtle shift in the way the workers interacted with her. While Tom had reluctantly agreed to check the measurements again, the undercurrent of resistance still lingered in the air. Jasmine could feel it, a quiet but palpable wariness from the men around her. As she walked past a group of workers who were securing a steel beam in place, she overheard a few hushed conversations. She didn't have to strain to hear the whispers. Some of the workers were speaking openly, as if they didn't mind whether she overheard them or not. "I heard she owns the company," one of them muttered, his voice low. "Can't believe that woman's in charge of all this." Another worker responded, though his tone seemed more uncertain. "Yeah, but she seems to know what she's talking about. I'm just saying, she's not what I expected." Jasmine didn't stop walking. She let the murmurs wash over her, knowing full well that her presence on this site, her very existence as a black woman in charge of a construction company, was still hard for some to reconcile. But she wasn't here for approval. She was here to make sure the job got done, and it was getting done under her terms. In the distance, she spotted Tom again, this time overseeing a group of men as they measured out the foundation for the next phase of the project. There was a slight difference in the way he held himself. His posture was straighter, his movements less dismissive, though his face still carried a trace of embarrassment from their earlier confrontation. Jasmine watched him for a moment, her gaze steady. He had tried to dismiss her earlier, but now he was slowly coming around, accepting that she wasn't going anywhere. She knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but she could see the cracks forming in his defiant armor. And then, just as she was about to approach him again, Jim, one of the quieter workers who had been hanging back during the earlier interaction, caught her attention. Jim was a bit younger, in his mid-20s, with a friendly but shy demeanor. He had always seemed to take a neutral stance, not participating in the conversations that often bubbled up on the site about her authority. "Jasmine," Jim called, walking toward her with a purposeful but nervous step. She turned to face him, her eyes softening. "Hey, Jim, everything going smoothly today?" she asked, her tone professional but warm. Yeah, for the most part," he said, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. "Listen, I just wanted to apologize for, what happened earlier with Tom." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, a bit surprised by the sudden apology. Apologize for what? "For the way things went down," Jim continued, his voice low. "I didn't say anything at the time, but I saw what was going on, and I didn't like how he was treating you. You deserve more respect than that." Jasmine felt a flicker of warmth at his words. She had expected to face some pushback from the others, but hearing it from someone like Jim, a younger worker who hadn't been involved in the confrontation, was unexpected. "I appreciate that, Jim," she said, her voice sincere, "but you don't have to apologize for him. I'm here to do my job, and I don't need anyone's pity. I just need the work to get done, and I need it done right." Jim nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Right, and, well, I just want you to know I've got your back. If anyone gives you trouble, I'll step in. I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels that way." Jasmine studied his face for a moment, sensing the sincerity in his words. She had always known that true leadership wasn't about forcing respect. It was about earning it. Jim's quiet support was more valuable than anything Tom's mockery could offer. "Thanks, Jim," she said, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "That means more than you know." Before Jim could respond, one of the other workers called for his attention, and he quickly turned to join the group. Jasmine watched him go, feeling a slight shift in her own heart. This wasn't just about proving herself to Tom or anyone else on the site. It was about slowly changing the culture, about showing that someone like her, someone who had fought for every step forward, could stand in the room, take charge, and be heard. As the day wore on, Jasmine found herself checking in on different parts of the site, making sure that everything was on track. But with each passing hour, she began to notice a subtle change. The workers were starting to engage with her more. They weren't just following orders, they were asking her for her input. They were recognizing her authority, not because she was forcing it, but because she had earned it. And then, when she passed by Tom once more, she saw something that made her pause. For the first time since the confrontation, Tom actually made eye contact with her, not with defiance, but with acknowledgement. He didn't smile, but there was no sneer in his expression either. It was a silent recognition, a quiet moment, where he knew he had underestimated her. And though the apology hadn't come yet, she didn't need it. This, she realized, was his way of beginning to respect her. She nodded in his direction and walked past him without a word, her focus returning to the project at hand. The real work wasn't about changing Tom's mind in an instant. It was about continuing to show up, continuing to lead, and continuing to earn the respect she deserved, one task at a time. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But Jasmine knew that if she kept going, if she kept leading, that respect, real, unshakable respect, would come not just from Tom, but from everyone around her. And that was worth everything. Days passed on the construction site, and the once tense atmosphere was beginning to settle. Jasmine continued her rounds, checking on the various teams, ensuring that everything was on track. The workers were more cooperative, and while Tom's pride still seemed bruised, he no longer openly challenged her. It was clear that her authority was starting to stick. Slowly but surely, she was earning their respect. But there was still work to be done. Jasmine knew that one interaction with Tom wouldn't fix everything. The real test of her leadership would come when she faced a situation where her decisions were questioned again. Would she be able to handle it with the same grace and authority? Or would the underlying prejudice and assumptions bubble back to the surface? As the week progressed, the tension finally seemed to break when Jasmine called a team meeting with the site foreman. She needed to go over the final details before the foundation was fully set and ensure everyone understood their responsibilities. The meeting was scheduled for the late afternoon, after the workers had finished their shifts for the day. When the time came, Jasmine stood in front of the group, her posture straight and confident as she addressed the foreman. "All right, everyone, we're nearing the final stages of this phase of the project. We've got a few things left to finalize, some rebar adjustments, the final measurements on the foundation, and we need to discuss the safety protocols one more time." She glanced around at the men gathered around the table, men who, only a few days ago, had made her feel like an outsider. But now she saw respect in their eyes. They were listening. They were paying attention. "Tom," Jasmine said, making sure to address him directly, "can you give me a rundown on the status of the steel rebar?" Tom stiffened slightly at the sound of his name, and for a brief moment there was a flicker of discomfort on his face. He hadn't expected to be called on, and there was a moment's hesitation before he responded, his voice more subdued than usual. "We're good on that front," Tom said, his eyes meeting hers. "I checked the measurements twice, and everything's in line. Should be set for the next phase." Jasmine nodded, her expression impassive, but there was a hint of satisfaction in the way she acknowledged him. She had noticed that he had stopped referring to her orders as requests, and had shifted to treating them as just part of his job. There was no longer the mocking tone he had once used. His response was measured, respectful. "Good," she said, her voice calm but authoritative. "Let's make sure we keep it that way. Safety's our top priority." The other foreman nodded, and for the first time, there was a sense of unity in the room. Jasmine could feel it, a subtle shift, but it was there. These men, who had once looked at her as an outsider, were now treating her like the boss she was, and it wasn't just because she had forced her way into their space, it was because she had proven that she belonged there, that she was capable, and that her leadership was effective. As the meeting went on, Jasmine continued to direct the flow of conversation, making sure each issue was addressed with precision. Tom, once the most vocal skeptic, had now become a quiet ally, offering his input when necessary without hesitation. The other foremen seemed to have relaxed, no longer holding on to the tension that had once defined their interactions with her. But the true test came when a small issue arose regarding a section of the foundation. One of the foremen, Carl, raised his hand, speaking up with a hint of uncertainty. "Jasmine," Carl began, his tone cautious, "I've noticed something on the east side of the foundation. The soil's a bit looser than expected, and I'm not sure if it's safe to pour the concrete over it just yet. I'd like to hold off and get a second opinion before we move forward." Jasmine's eyes flicked over to Carl, her mind quickly processing the information. It wasn't an easy call to make, but her instincts told her he was right. The foundation needed to be perfect, and any compromise could delay the entire project. She didn't hesitate. "We'll get a soil test," she said, her voice firm. "I don't take chances with safety. Make sure it's done before we proceed." There was a brief pause, and for a split second, Jasmine wondered if Carl would challenge her decision, perhaps assuming that a woman like her wouldn't understand the technicalities of the soil testing. But instead, Carl simply nodded, clearly relieved to have his concern taken seriously. "Got it," Carl said, his voice respectful. The room fell into a brief, comfortable silence. Jasmine stood tall, a quiet confidence settling over her as she looked around at the men in the room. This was her moment, the moment where the work spoke for itself, where her authority was no longer questioned. As the meeting adjourned, Jasmine felt a sense of accomplishment. Though she knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, there would always be people who doubted her, people who saw her as different or less than. But as she walked away from the meeting, heading back out onto the construction site, she knew something had changed in the way these men viewed her. Her leadership wasn't just about what she knew or the authority she commanded. It was about how she handled situations with integrity, how she showed respect for others, and how she demanded the same in return. That was what had earned her place here. As she walked past Tom again, he gave her a brief, almost imperceptible nod, a small but significant gesture. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was an acknowledgement. And in that moment, Jasmine knew that this wasn't just about this construction project anymore. It was about breaking down barriers, about proving that everyone deserved respect, regardless of gender or race. And she would continue proving it every single day. The days following the meeting were calm but purposeful. Jasmine continued her oversight of the construction project, moving from one task to the next with efficiency and grace. The workers were now well into the rhythm of the project, and though some were still adjusting to the new dynamic on site, the overall atmosphere was more cooperative than it had been in the past. Jasmine could see it in their faces, hear it in the way they spoke to her. Respect was no longer something she had to demand. It was becoming part of the fabric of the worksite. Tom had fully accepted her leadership, though his pride had been bruised in ways that he wasn't fully ready to admit. Still, his contributions were more focused now, and he no longer challenged her decisions. His attitude had shifted from one of reluctant tolerance to quiet acknowledgement. Jasmine was starting to believe that he might finally be on the path to understanding, not just who she was, but the value of her leadership. But as the project moved into the final stages of the phase, a problem arose, one that was unexpected, and one that would require all of Jasmine's strength and authority to handle. It began with a phone call late in the afternoon, just as the workers were finishing up for the day. Jasmine had been reviewing the blueprints for the next phase when her phone buzzed on the table beside her. The name on the screen was familiar: Victor, her mentor and close friend, the head of a construction consulting firm that had been a crucial part of her rise in the industry. He had guided her in the early years, helping her navigate the pitfalls of starting a business in a male-dominated field. "Jasmine," Victor's voice crackled through the line, "there's a serious issue with the permits. I just got off the phone with the city office, and they've flagged a few discrepancies in the paperwork." Jasmine felt her stomach drop. She had been meticulous with every document, every approval. Her company was known for its precision, its attention to detail. If there was a discrepancy in the permits, it could cause massive delays. "Discrepancies?" Jasmine repeated, her mind already running through possible errors in the paperwork. "What kind of discrepancies?" "It's regarding the foundation, specifically the soil quality and some of the environmental assessments," Victor explained. "They don't believe the testing was thorough enough, and without the right approvals, the project could be halted. I suggest you get in touch with them immediately." The weight of the situation settled heavily on Jasmine's shoulders. The project was so close to completion, and this setback could destroy everything. It wasn't just about the construction. This could damage her reputation, the company's credibility, everything she had worked for. The realization hit her hard. She had to fix this. "I'll call the city office right now," Jasmine said, already reaching for her phone. "Thank you for the heads up." After hanging up, she paced around the trailer, her mind racing. This wasn't just about paperwork. It was about showing her workers, her clients, and her competitors that she was capable of handling anything that came her way. This was another test, a test that would determine whether she was truly fit to lead, or whether this setback would be the beginning of her downfall. Without wasting another moment, she walked straight over to Tom, who was finishing up his work by the large crane. He noticed her approach and straightened up, as though bracing for a command. "Tom," Jasmine said, her voice low but firm, "we've got a situation with the permits. The city office flagged the foundation as non-compliant. They say the environmental assessments and soil testing weren't thorough enough, and they're threatening to halt the project." Tom's eyes widened in surprise. This was the last thing he had expected to hear. "What do you need me to do?" he asked immediately, a hint of concern in his voice. "I need you to go through the soil testing documentation "From our last report," Jasmine replied. "Check it against the regulations. If there's anything that was missed, I need to know about it, fast." Without hesitation, Tom nodded. "Got it. I'll go over it now." Jasmine didn't wait to see if he followed through. She had work to do herself. She quickly dialed the city office number, the sound of the phone ringing in her ear, echoing the urgency she felt. The minutes dragged on, each second more torturous than the last, as she was transferred from one department to the next. When she finally reached the right person, a cold voice on the other end told her exactly what she feared. "Ms. Bennett, the issue with the permits is quite serious. We cannot authorize any further progress on the construction until the environmental assessment is redone and submitted. I'm afraid if the issue is not resolved soon, we'll have no choice but to revoke the approval for this project." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat, but she knew that this was her moment. She had to remain composed, no matter how overwhelming the situation felt. "I understand," Jasmine replied evenly, her voice unwavering. "I'll have the necessary documents re-verified and sent over immediately. Thank you for your time." As she hung up, a heavy silence settled around her. The weight of the problem was suffocating. But Jasmine wasn't going to let this defeat her. She knew that this was just another test, a test of her resolve, her ability to stay calm under pressure. She had faced challenges before, but this one felt different. This time, the stakes were higher. She walked back to Tom, who was already reviewing the documents, looking focused and determined. "I've got everything laid out," he said, handing her a folder filled with the testing reports. "There's a minor issue with the depth of the soil tests, but it's nothing we can't fix. We'll get it cleared up." Jasmine took the documents and scanned them quickly. The relief she felt was almost palpable, but she knew it wasn't over yet. "Good work," she said, her voice steady, but with an underlying gratitude. "Now we need to get everything submitted to the city office before the end of the day." Tom's eyes met hers, and for the first time in a long while, there was no resistance. There was no skepticism or doubt, just respect. "We'll get it done," he said, his voice firm and confident. Jasmine felt a small smile tug at the corner of her lips. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the realization that even when things went wrong, she could fix them. And with her team behind her, she knew there was nothing they couldn't overcome. As they worked quickly to resolve the issue, Jasmine felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, knowing that this challenge had only made her stronger. It was another reminder that leadership wasn't just about managing the easy things, it was about facing the difficult, the unexpected, and coming out on top. When the day finally ended, Jasmine took a deep breath, standing outside the trailer as the last of the workers packed up for the night. She had handled the situation, and with that, she had earned another level of respect, not just from Tom, but from everyone who had witnessed her response. The construction site was no longer just a job for her. It was a testament to the resilience, strength, and leadership that she had built, brick by brick, day by day. The next morning, Jasmine arrived at the construction site early, determined to see the permit issue resolved. She had stayed up late the night before, making sure every detail was in place. The necessary documents had been re-verified, the corrected soil tests had been submitted, and she was waiting on a response from the city office. But as she stepped out of her car, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Victor again. "Jasmine, it's done," he said, his voice filled with relief. "The city office just called me. Everything's cleared up. They've accepted the revised reports and the project is back on track. They're going to fast-track the approval." Jasmine felt a weight lift off her chest. "Thank you, Victor," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "I couldn't have done it without you." Victor chuckled on the other end. "You could have handled it yourself, but I'm glad we got it sorted. You've got a good team there. They're rallying behind you." Jasmine stood for a moment, staring out over the site, her heart swelling with pride. This was what it was all about, not just finishing a project, but doing it with integrity, with respect for her team, and with the determination to overcome any obstacle, no matter how big. "Thanks," she said again, her voice steady. "I'll see you soon." After hanging up, she took a deep breath and made her way toward the construction site. She could feel the energy shifting once again. There was no turning back now. She wasn't just leading this project, she was leading a transformation in the industry. A woman of color, once dismissed, now commanding the respect she had always deserved. As she walked past the workers, she noticed a subtle change. The men who once looked at her with skepticism were now engaging with her more openly. They approached her with questions, ideas, and even suggestions, no longer hesitant to be around the boss. It was as though they had all recognized something. Jasmine wasn't just a leader by title, but by her actions, her character, and her unwavering strength. Her phone buzzed again. It was Tom, his name flashing across the screen. Jasmine answered, ready for whatever updates he had for her. "Jasmine," Tom said, his voice serious, "I've been going over the site plans for the next phase, and I think we should consider reinforcing the structural supports a bit more. It's not a huge issue, but it could save us time and money in the long run. What do you think?" For the first time, Jasmine wasn't just hearing a subordinate speaking to his boss. She was hearing a partner. He wasn't just taking orders, he was offering his expertise and working alongside her to make sure the project would be a success. "I agree," Jasmine replied, her voice filled with confidence. "Let's make it happen. I'll authorize the extra materials. You know what to do." "Thanks," Tom said, and there was a hint of something new in his voice. Appreciation, respect. "I'll get started right away." As Jasmine ended the call, she realized something significant had happened. It wasn't just that the project was back on track, it was that her leadership had created a shift in the way her team saw each other. They were working as a unit now, no longer divided by assumptions, prejudice, or hierarchy. They were focused on the task at hand, moving forward together. She walked toward the site office and entered to find her team already gathered around a table, preparing for the next phase of the project. The foremen were discussing the new plans, going over the logistics of the next stage, and there was a clear sense of cooperation in the room. Tom looked up as she entered, his expression genuine. "Everything's looking good," he said. "We've made the necessary adjustments to the foundation. Just need your final sign-off on the new blueprints." Jasmine nodded, stepping forward. "Good. I've already given approval for the changes. Let's get this phase finished right, and then we'll look ahead to the final details." As she gave the final nod of approval, she could sense something in the room had shifted. The respect she had worked so hard to earn was no longer just something she demanded, it was something they now offered her willingly and with pride. Before she left the office, she turned to address the team. "I know it's been a tough couple of days, but I want you all to know I trust each and every one of you. Together, we're going to finish this project on time and set a new standard for the way things are done. We've shown that we can overcome any obstacle, and that's something to be proud of. Let's get it done." The room was quiet for a moment, and then, one by one, the men nodded in agreement. There was a brief murmur of approval, and Jasmine could feel the collective strength of her team. She had earned their respect, and she had earned it by leading with integrity and showing them, through her actions, that anyone could break through the barriers that stood in their way. As Jasmine left the office and returned to the site, she knew there would always be challenges ahead. There would always be people who doubted her, people who questioned her place in the industry. But she was no longer invisible. She was seen, she was respected, and, most importantly, she had earned her place as a leader, not because of her gender, not because of her race, but because of the work she had done, the lessons she had taught, and the strength she had shown. She took a deep breath, the sound of construction around her filling the air. There was still work to be done, but as she watched her team moving together in harmony, she felt something she hadn't felt before, a deep, unwavering confidence. This was just the beginning, and Jasmine was ready for whatever came next. As the days passed and the project entered its final stages, Jasmine found herself feeling a sense of accomplishment that she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. The challenges they had faced were real, but they had overcome each one together. Her team, now fully behind her, was moving through the tasks with a renewed energy. But there was one more obstacle left, one that wasn't as visible as the others, but would require all of her leadership to overcome. It happened on a routine check one afternoon. Jasmine had been reviewing the progress on the site when she noticed something that didn't quite add up. The construction crew was behind schedule on a few key tasks, and while they had made up time in some areas, there was one section that wasn't moving as quickly as it should have been. The scaffolding wasn't being assembled as efficiently, and some of the workers seemed distracted. Jasmine paused, watching the crew for a moment. There was an energy in the air, something that felt off. She moved closer to the workers and overheard a conversation. "I don't know what's going on," one of the workers. Carlos said to another. "This stuff just isn't going right. Every time we try to get the scaffolding set, something's wrong. Maybe we missed a step." "I've got a bad feeling about this," the second worker replied. "We're already behind, and we can't afford to mess this up. The boss is on our back." Jasmine felt the knot of tension tighten in her stomach. She knew that these were the moments that tested a leader, the moments when everything seemed fine on the surface, but there were small cracks appearing, signs that something deeper was going wrong. She stepped forward, catching their attention. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice calm but authoritative. Carlos turned toward her, clearly uneasy. "It's just some issues with the scaffolding, Ms. Bennett. We're trying to get it up, but it's not going as smoothly as it should. We're just not sure what's causing the delay." Jasmine observed the scene for a moment, noting the frustration and confusion on their faces. It was clear that something was bothering them. "Is it a technical issue?" she asked, her mind immediately running through the potential causes. "Or is there something else?" Carlos hesitated, then spoke, his voice quiet. "There's just been some tension on the site lately. People aren't talking much, we're trying to stay focused, but I think some of the workers are still struggling with the way things changed, the way you stepped in." Jasmine's heart sank. She had hoped that the shift in the atmosphere had been permanent, that they had fully accepted her leadership. But there was still residual resistance. Even if it wasn't openly spoken, it wasn't just about the work, it was about the culture, the mentality that had been ingrained in this industry for so long. Jasmine had come in as an outsider, a woman who had broken through every barrier to get here, but not everyone on her team was ready to accept that. She took a deep breath, understanding that this was another hurdle she had to overcome. She couldn't just ignore the underlying tension. She had to address it head-on and quickly, before it sabotaged the entire project. "I know things have changed here," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "I've seen the difference in the way we work, the way we communicate, and I understand that it's not easy. But I'm not here to make your job harder. I'm here to make sure this project gets done right, and to make sure that we all do it together. We're a team, and we have to trust each other." Carlos looked at her for a moment, and then nodded. "I get it," he said, though there was still a hint of reluctance in his tone. "We'll pull it together." But Jasmine knew that it wasn't just about words, it was about actions. She needed to lead by example, to show them that she understood the pressures they were under and that she was willing to work just as hard side by side to get this project completed. "I'll be right here with you," Jasmine said. "Let's get this scaffolding up. We don't have time to waste." She turned and walked to the scaffolding team, rolling up her sleeves and getting involved in the work. At first, the men hesitated, unsure of whether to follow her lead. But as she worked alongside them, moving the heavy beams and adjusting the scaffold structure, something started to change. Slowly but surely, the tension began to lift. Workers who had been standing idle or whispering in the corners were now stepping forward, taking initiative, and getting to work. Jasmine worked tirelessly, offering advice where necessary, but mostly leading by example. It was hard, physical labor, but it was exactly what the team needed to see. Jasmine wasn't just the boss on paper. She was one of them, and she was willing to put in the same effort as anyone else. By the end of the day, the scaffolding was fully assembled. They were back on track, and the crew was moving forward with renewed energy. As Jasmine stood back to survey the site, she realized something important. The challenge hadn't been the construction itself. It had been changing the mindset of the workers and helping them overcome the invisible barriers that had held them back. It wasn't enough to simply demand respect. She had to show them that she deserved it every step of the way. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The scaffolding was just the beginning. There were still final adjustments to make, inspections to pass, and safety protocols to ensure the project was completed to the highest standards. But with the scaffolding now securely in place, Jasmine could feel the team's momentum building. The workers were operating as a cohesive unit, their efforts no longer hindered by the undercurrent of doubt that had previously plagued them. Jasmine's leadership had transformed the energy on the site. What had once been a division between the foreman and workers was now a partnership, a shared commitment to the project's success. Even Tom, who had been the most resistant to her leadership, was actively contributing ideas and solutions, no longer seeing her as an outsider, but as a trusted partner in the process. Yet, even as things improved on the site, Jasmine was mindful of the challenges that still lay ahead. The construction industry was vast, and for every project completed, there would be more obstacles to face. But Jasmine knew that the key to success wasn't just about completing a single project, it was about building a reputation. One that would break down the barriers for future generations of women and people of color in this industry. One afternoon, as Jasmine was reviewing the final layout plans in the office, she received an unexpected call. It was from a local business owner who had been following her progress and was impressed by the way she had turned around the project. "I've been watching your company for a while," the voice on the other end said. "You've got a reputation for getting things done. I'd like to talk about a potential collaboration, something bigger, something that could change the landscape of construction in this city." Jasmine's heart raced, her mind already running through the possibilities. This could be the breakthrough she had been waiting for, an opportunity to not only expand her business, but to set a new standard for the industry. "I'm listening," she said, her voice filled with quiet anticipation. The conversation that followed was the start of something new, a chance to not only prove her worth on this project, but to take on the challenges of an entire industry, one that still had so much room for change. As she hung up the phone, Jasmine stepped outside to the site once more, looking over the workers as they finished the day's tasks. She had come a long way since that first confrontation with Tom, but she knew this was just the beginning. She had built a foundation, not just of steel and concrete, but of trust, respect, and resilience. And that foundation, she knew, would support her through everything that lay ahead. The weeks following the call marked a turning point in Jasmine's career. The collaboration she had discussed with the local business owner became a reality, and the project was even more ambitious than she had imagined. It wasn't just about the job itself. It was about the opportunity to reshape the future of construction in her city, to create a space where diversity, integrity, and respect were the new standard. Jasmine knew that this collaboration wouldn't be easy. She had already faced resistance from certain corners of the industry, and she knew there would be more challenges ahead. But now, more than ever, she was ready for whatever came her way. Her team was stronger, more united, and more motivated than it had ever been before. The culture on the construction site had completely transformed. Where there had once been quiet hostility, there was now a sense of camaraderie. The workers were no longer divided by old biases. They had learned to trust Jasmine's leadership, and in turn, they had learned to trust one another. Tom, once the most resistant, had become one of her strongest allies, offering suggestions and working alongside her to ensure that every aspect of the project was done to perfection. One afternoon, Jasmine walked through the site, watching as the final touches were made on the building's structure. The scaffolding, the beams, the foundation, all of it was coming together piece by piece. It wasn't just a project anymore. It was a reflection of everything she had worked for. Her vision was becoming a reality. As she stood on the site surveying the progress, she was approached by Carlos, the worker who had confided in her about the tension on the site weeks ago. This time, there was no hesitation in his steps. He walked toward her with confidence, his eyes steady. "Jasmine," he said, his tone respectful, "I just wanted to say thanks. You've really turned things around here. I don't think we'd be this far without you." Jasmine smiled, but her smile was filled with humility. "I didn't do it alone, Carlos," she replied. "This was all of us, every single person who put in the work. We're a team, and that's why we're getting it done." Carlos nodded, his eyes showing a quiet appreciation. "I know, but still." "You led us. We all saw that. You gave us the confidence to push through, even when things were tough." For the first time, Jasmine felt the weight of his words. The ripple effect she had set in motion was beginning to spread. It wasn't just about the work she was doing, it was about the people she was inspiring, the example she was setting, and the legacy she was beginning to build. As the project neared completion, Jasmine found herself reflecting on everything she had gone through to get to this point. The long hours, the resistance, the prejudice. Each of those had been hurdles, but they hadn't stopped her. If anything, they had fueled her determination. Now, the project was on the verge of completion, and Jasmine was about to stand in front of a building that would serve as a testament to her resilience and vision. She looked over the site one last time that day. The workers were wrapping up their tasks, the sun was beginning to set, and everything seemed to be in perfect alignment. Jasmine knew there would be other challenges ahead, other battles to fight. But for now, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. The path she had forged wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who would come after her, for every woman, every person of color, every individual who had ever been told they didn't belong. Jasmine had shown them that the walls of the construction industry weren't built to keep them out. They were built to be torn down, and she was the one to tear them down. The day the project was officially completed, Jasmine stood at the site with her team, the final inspection checks complete, and the last touches finished. The building before them was more than just a structure of steel and glass. It was a symbol of what they had accomplished together. It was a testament to resilience, perseverance, and breaking through barriers. Jasmine's phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her moment of reflection. It was a message from Victor. "I'm proud of you, Jasmine. You've done what many thought impossible. This project is just the beginning. The industry won't know what hit it." A smile spread across her face as she typed a quick reply. "It's just the start, Victor. We've got a lot more work to do." But deep down, Jasmine knew the significance of this moment. She had not only led a successful project, she had sparked a movement within the industry. Change had begun, and she had played a pivotal role in making it happen. As the sun set over the completed building, Jasmine felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This project had challenged her in ways she had never imagined, but it had also shown her just how much she was capable of. More importantly, it had proven that change was possible. The construction industry was just the first step. Jasmine knew there was more to be done. There were more walls to break down, more minds to change, and more opportunities to create for those who had been overlooked for so long. She looked out over the city, the skyline stretching before her. She could already see the possibilities unfolding, new projects, new ideas, and a future where respect, diversity, and equality were at the core of every construction site. And as the team celebrated their accomplishment, Jasmine felt a quiet sense of peace. The work she had done had not only built a physical structure, it had laid the groundwork for a legacy that would inspire others for years to come. She was ready for the next challenge, ready for whatever came next. Because Jasmine Bennett, the woman who once had to prove she belonged, had now become a leader who was impossible to ignore. And that was just the beginning.